I think it's helpful. In the audience, how many people are familiar with systems thinking or systemic design? Like, do you kind of understand it? Put your hand up. Could you explain it to someone? Put your hand up. Do you work with it on a regular basis? Put your hand up. Okay, cool. I think it might be helpful then. I think a lot of practitioners in the room might be very familiar with design thinking. Could you kind of give them some context with the systemic design stuff? Like what are the similarities and differences, just so they have some kind of like bearing, I guess.
Interesting. I did some work I did last year, so I was lucky enough to go to Singapore, and there's a difference between design thinking and systematic design, to be honest. And if anyone actually been in Asia before, design thinking and the concept is pretty thick, just because they've got complete different culture, and making sure that it's very human approach in terms of approach, it just really fits organizational cultural difference in general. Singapore is quite unique. Has anyone actually been to Singapore before? And it has yeah, perfect. So quite a new country state, pretty much. I think it's probably about 60 years old, probably younger. Its original founders are Asian, Malay, and Indian, so those three. And most of the people here are part of it, which is quite a unique perspective to say in the first place. The question is, how do you design for a newest country in general, and work with government, work with the local people that are all come from different backgrounds, that are common in general? I think that's the biggest challenge that we face from the end there. And we didn't go, this is the approach, this is how we're going to change the way we look at unemployment. So that's the design challenge we have. We work with local partners, speak with coaches, support the care patients, create a better way of doing things. So we create a holistic model of thinking better, moving better, eating better, and sleeping better. And we try to think about those local community members, their partners, their participants, and their needs over time. So there's a slight difference there where we look at design thinking, where we look at one person's particular life, where we think about how to think about the whole of the journey, what will we do, and how it will integrate them. So that's a big role to go back to.
I'm trying different things. I don't have a decent answer at the moment. I've tried saying systems thinking, talking about the context in which something's happening, trying not to get people to talk about product or the solution, because there's never only one and things change. I've tried educational videos, I've given presentations, I've used a lot of different analogy. Currently, I'm trying building causal loop diagrams for a particular project that we've got going on. We've been using the excellent system mapping network. System mapping toolkit on Miro, which actually seems to be very easy to work through and follow. And so this time we're trying assets to show it, but I do think that actually the gap I'm seeing at the moment is, so we have built a causal loop. We built a couple. It's a really complex area. It's around emissions and health and the impacts, and we're looking at where we play within emissions and we can do something new. But trying to story tell it, I think is what we're going to do next, because we've built it, we've followed it, we've followed the process, and now we have an artifact that I don't think you can get your head around legally unless you've done research behind the fact. So in my view, I think there's a way to go to try and frame it and name it in terms that are understandable, especially to people who have, in business anyway, who are often thinking quite short term. And you know, if you look at ESG right now, there's a lot of counting. It's like, well, what happens after counting, and how do you do that? And so we've got a way to go. And I think what I'm seeing is that designers can meet systems thinking, systems design, and we actually could look at what we produce next with the combination of the two. And that's quite a fertile ground for, like, I guess in a way, it's sort of the framing that you're doing, Manny, from what you've said about the work at RCA. It's, we need
Yeah, so
more around it.
from what I got from both of what you said was you're looking at the entirety of the whole instead of zooming in on the parts to zoom out, as it were. I think a lot of service designers are interested about the business side of things and how this would fit into the business side of things. What do you see the main challenges being in terms of sitting down with business leaders at the C-suite and really having a conversation where you're going to look at the entire holistic perspective and spend time really delving into all of the causes and all of the problems we're looking at in the entire value chain? It's not normally how they do things, right? So like, what are the main disconnects for you in your experience that you found?
So it's quite funny. I'm almost a designer, well, not a designer because I've got a business background. I know shock horror, but 12 years ago, I started a business in innovation consultancy and I quickly shifted to design. So I learned about human-centered design. I was using it day in, day out. I fell in love with it, went back to do my master's, and I'm a service designer now. I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people think about is that they have got a funny mindset in terms of what can you do for me now? So there's this whole question of I just want an outcome, and there is a part of having a conversation. I always say we need to have empathy for everyone in the room and outside the room, so understanding where they are and trying to make sure that what we're trying to develop links to their goals as well. And I think quite a few of you might be familiar with the phase zero approach, where you invite different people from around the business or even outside the business to understand exactly what they need, and there can be some alignment there before you start doing the work. I try not to over-educate the business side of what I'm doing in terms of how I do it. It's more what the outcomes are, why it's important for them. I think articulating that in terms of what they care about is important.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest issue I would say I have is in agencies, you're not around for long enough. So what you're looking for, because obviously climate change is long term and you need to come back to it and you need to iterate it. So I could have a conversation and say that I think these are the areas that they need to do and build a roadmap and talk about change now, near, next, and whatever. And I do, but seeing it really seeing it through and driving that kind of in a way, that creative direction of change is something that I don't always get possibility to do. So what you're looking for is somebody who can continue to be the advocate within the business.
That's an excellent point. Just to almost add to what you said, Helen, I know you're part of the agency as well, but I always find it's interesting. So I've worked in a lot of complex organizations over the years, doing some work at Home Finland at the moment. I've worked with many different organizations. You find that there's some agencies that have either worked on or working in this ecosystem. They don't spend a lot of time talking to each other. A lot of times it's elbowing each other behind the back and say, oh, their work rubbish, we need to hire us to do this work, or we can almost improve it in some way or some form. And as I mentioned before, there needs to be a long-term partnership around this, where you're not just there for, let's say, 6 months a year. You're looking for the whole journey to see, okay, how can we work with you even further, almost a retainer model in some way, where we can work with you. Maybe there might be a method within method around that approach to think about how we can start working with something to figure out what are some of the long-term benefits of working with these companies. Because you go in and do some work, you go out as an agency, and then another agency goes in and changes it. Or the worst thing is there's this whole thing I like to call design savior complex, where as designers, no one else can solve the problem. This almost reminds me of the whole kind of tech bro culture in America and many parts of the world, where technologists think technology can save the world. Designers and I also biases, we can come in, we can show them this fancy diagram, this fancy methodology, and then they're going to love it. A lot of these people have lived and breathed the environment, the industry for 20, 30 years. And someone that's coming into design as an expert will say, this, you need to change everything you're doing to move on. They can be very defensive over time. And I think that needs to change. It needs to be more of a listening, understanding where they come from first before trying to change everything. Just create either quick wins or, you know, say that, well, we've been here for a year, 6 months. This is what we said we're going to do. We're going to do it. We're going to leave you a little. Probably not.
That's brilliant, actually. And I mean, I was going to ask this, that, but you know, tagging on to the whole listening to the system and the importance of it and how you do it, I think is still an emerging practice, and the methods are becoming more inventive and more experimental, particularly in the areas where we're trying to engage voices that have either been overlooked or generally not included, or, you know, subconsciously excluded. How do we include these voices? How do we approach the collection of narratives and stories in particular, where voices have been excluded for a very long time, and there's this kind of rigid barrier? How do we do that? How have you done that, or have you thought about that?
I'll be in a completely different place if I knew the direct answer to that. A lot richer, a lot more high profile. There's some ways I've tried to do this before. One of the biggest challenges I've found working across different organizations is that knowledge transfer is probably the biggest challenge, where people or pockets of departments or teams have come up with these ideas, but they're just not shared around in general. And myself and some other service designers with Homes England, we're creating this massive tube map. I came in halfway through, so I'm not going to take credit for this, but Homes England, they had no visibility of all the service out in flat at the moment across the whole agency. So there's been a whole effort to actually create this whole view of all the different basically services that are coming up in a moment, who has ownership of them, and where they are across the whole process. This is giving more visibility and building a conversation around what things overlap. How can this project or this service internet with another service at the time, rather than creating silence in general?
How important is the visualization of that complexity then?
It's funny, a lot of businesses don't know it until you start asking those questions. So it is listening and having a dialogue back and forth. I'm doing some work again in Mexico this year. Humble brag. I'll tell you, it's going to be in July. It's going to be in July, so it's not going to be uncomfortable. But at a high level, without going into too much detail, I'm working with a certain institution, and I'm helping them better collaborate with a lot of the local businesses in their areas. This is in Latin America, especially. And the thing is, I don't understand the context of it. And I don't think they actually understand the size of this piece of work yet. So even before I start, there needs to be a back and forth. And what I usually do, I try to involve as many people that have that local knowledge before I come in once again with my Western viewpoint to change things, or say, oh, this is what's going on. How do I understand what's happened, what the change looks like, understand their mental models and how they think about things before I start pushing and probing and jumping to solutions.
And jump in. I'm just curious, you know, we create these wonderfully complex system maps that look really impressive, but at the end of the day, nobody knows how the hell to read them or how to make sense of them.
Yeah.
They look great.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. They're great. But at the end of the day, what is the value of them? Is it the narrative, or is it the process?
I think it's probably a mixture of both, but I reserve the right to change my mind when we're out back at this piece of work that we're doing in about a month's time. I think that the process of putting it together has been one of collaboration, communication, discovery, research. It's bringing everything together, and then that's been mapped. Can that be transferred over to somebody else if you come and pick it up and carry on? No, not really. It's a very specific asset, and it is the combination of an awful lot of thinking and research. So I do feel that there needs to be a translation from that into something that can travel, that other people can get their heads around.
This is for me where, you know, for me it's just a field or narrative to emerge, and then once I've got the narrative, that's it. Because we talk about the, you know, what is data in this instance? Are we looking at quantitative models, or are we looking at a new way of dealing with data?
In this instance, doing the mapping helped us realise there was a gap that hasn't been researched properly before, that there is very little information about, and will be really interesting to do some work in. So it was useful as a tool, and in mapping that landscape to do what we were actually trying to achieve anyway, which is find something new and an area that was quite fertile to continue researching. So I think we'll find that, you know, in the same way that we might in the past, if we were talking about design, be debating whether personas are better to use than archetypes, and whether archetypes are built with quant and qual, or, you know, whether personas are made up or not. It's going to be the same kind of thing, and that's what's really lovely about it, because the discussions can be really rich, and I don't think there's one size fits all. I think there'll be times when you nail it and you've created an asset and it comes across, and it depends on who you're doing it with and how their brains work. And there are other times when you need to bring it all to life and it's part of a story. And my gut feel at the moment is that we need to do exactly that and kind of explode the map that we've made, but explain why, what it means, what the insights were, and then back it up with the research that we've done so that they get the general story of what we found and why.
It's a really tricky one, because I find that when someone comes up to me or I start a project or an opportunity, and they say, oh, I want you to create a service blueprint or a 2B map or something, and I ask them, okay, then, but why? And they pause because they think I'm just here to deliver.
It's a formula.
Yeah, an artifact in general, but they don't understand it's a journey, it's conversations, it's understanding what we're missing as a before. It's asking those questions where, oh, we need to involve this person from another part of the business or a partner we're working with in general, and getting those different people to come together to put together something that tells a story that shows you how something works, going back to that visible and invisible part of the services, how they all connect over time. The trickiest issue in terms of my point of view is 9% of what I do is the conversations, the facilitation of that, and bringing people that don't really get to talk to each other inside and outside organization together.
So if so everything I've heard so far overlaps massively with what I understand service design to be and design thinking to be. I would imagine it sounds a lot like that co-creation and
social
really,
design.
Sorry?
And social design.
And social design. If you're to take systems thinking as like an umbrella term with social innovation and complexity design, like a bunch of different disciplines that don't really match with each other, but they kind of just fall under this term, umbrella term of systems thinking. Systemic design, as far as I understand it, is more a combination of a few different processes, so design thinking and systems thinking, and it has like a few different people have approached it with a set of tools, and the tools are just, everyone knows within design, tools are just there to learn, right? Canvases are just there to facilitate conversation and visualize something. How do you see the need for that evolution of those different disciplines converging? Like, why do you see that as necessary now, or why is it happening now? Why is there a conversation different from systems thinking about systemic design, and why is there such a an interest in it right now?
I am, because we can't carry on as we have been, because we can't carry on churning out products that impact the environment. You know, we first started talking about this post-COVID when we'd all binge watched just about everything on Netflix, and so you go into work and you're creating digital stuff, and it was like, what's carbon footprint of what we make? as designers, we have a responsibility, don't we? What's that look like? If we think about ourselves as a supplier within a system, at some point, when everybody's done all they've got over their greenwashing, they've done all their carbon counting, they're then going to look to us, suppliers, to be able to deliver sustainable products, so sustainable digital design. And so I think we have had to start to look in different directions, and we are excited. Are you telling me I've got to shut up?
No.
We're excited to be looking into what's next for design, and that's what I'm exploring. Where is it going to go? So it's useful.
I think the world is way too connected to just not think about us as a system in terms of how we're all interrelated to each other. If one thing happens in one part of the world, there will be a direct or indirect causation to how I'm impacted in general. I've been lucky enough over 5-6 years now, and I'm doing some work with OpenIHO. So over the years, I've been lucky enough to be one of the chapter, the sort of London chapter. What's really been one of the key takeaways from that is we look at things from a hyper-local, let's say this room in general, or this bar, to a local level, London, to a national level, UK, and also at a global level. We work with different chapters from around the world. It could be from the Singapore, from Mexico, from any part of the world where there's a chapter. And we apply level collective intelligence where we're trying to figure out there might be a problem around, especially with COVID, how do remote education impact people? It's not just the food education, the parents. What about single moms and foster parents that are learning themselves? Think about all different areas. If we look at it from different parts of the world, they all have slightly different wicked complex problems. Understand those stories and bring them together to actually form and figure out, okay, then in Africa, there's this issue where people, this is from real research, they'd rather have physical resources rather than using bandwidth, because they rather use bandwidth to run their village, for example, compared to parts of Europe where they're looking at more technical solutions, compared to, let's say, parts of North America where there's issues around years and generations of let's say systematic, best word for it, certain communities have been impacted, especially Black community in general. So it's looking at all the different areas, putting it together, understanding what's the global issues, and breaking it down again into those areas of national, local, and hyper-local. How can we solve them? How can we get people in those areas to start being those champions? Applying system thinking, applying system design, so we can start solving those other things.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You're doing so much more of the social stuff, which I would love to do. I'm not, I'm on the other side. So the company I am and I'm not. The company I work for is owned by, my company is a standard, which is then owned by Hitachi. So I'm doing sustainability, but for energy, and looking at how we further future, sort out the grid so that it's actually sustainable. So I unfortunately don't get to think about or bring in lots of different people. I'm looking at the overall system and how that's all working and whether their business is working to make it happen or not. But either way, I think that what we're both trying to do, I seem to be summarising, is have an impact with what we do as designers.
And the thing is, just because you're working in the private sector, I'm working for non-profits or the public sector, we can share learnings.
Absolutely.
I think that I think this is one of the biggest things that sometimes companies and organisations and institutions get wrong. If they're the non-profit doing some amazing work and they've had an approach that works in their sector, why can't we learn from them? One of the things that I'm very disappointed in terms of the government, the national government, the world in general, is COVID impacted everyone. Doesn't matter if you're young, old, black, white, wealthy, poor, everyone was impacted by COVID. And what did we do across the world? We kind of hoarded all the resources for ourselves. Yeah, tolerance, masks, you name it. We spread fear. We're blaming different people rather than trying to figure out how do we work with each other. understanding Spanish flu, some of the issues that had happened in Asia where there was other medical issues many years ago where they wore masks. How can we learn from each other before judging and trying to think about, okay, let's just protect ourselves? There's a way to just share our insights with each other.
Are we coming to a point where we can't ignore the problems with
Yeah.
marketing, basically?
Exactly.
You know, we've been using human-centered approaches, or even to a certain extent life-centered approaches to problem solving, trying to, as you mentioned before, you know, like the designer is here to save the world. And we talk about, you know, it's about finding the cause of the problem, not the symptoms. But then underneath it, or rather kind of on a meta level, the mindset is what we haven't really been approaching holistically. Is that one of the pressing reasons why we need to think about systems thinking and how it might apply to this? Or are we just kind of rehashing reductionist approaches over and over again? What are we doing?
I think we're looking for something that's more long-term sustainable. So, for example, if I'm making a decision and guiding somebody and having an impact with sustainable energy, some of the problems that we're faced there is that as it becomes scarce and as we go to more renewable and it's not always on, there could be a plausible future where we use energy at certain times of the day and that's it, but it doesn't work for vulnerable people or for people who need it for some sort of life support, or people who, you know, why would a parent with small children, what would they can't cook at certain times of day because there's no electricity for them? We are going to face some difficult decisions. So I think from that perspective, these things do have to start to come together.
Yeah.
And it's not possible as one saving the world designer.
Really agree. I think one of the key things, so one of the things I've been almost falling in love with over the last couple of months is there's something called a privilege bill. Has anyone heard of it before, privilege bill? So fantastic, you can download it or you can search online. So it's just a diagram with big circles coming in and it looks at different layers of privilege. So let's say, for example, as a straight man, I've got a level of privilege. So it goes from man, woman, trans, for example, straight, bisexual, other issues, dark skinned, mixed skinned, white, for example, no citizenship, partly citizenship, I've got citizenship. It goes into I came from a stable family, or sorry, not stable family to a stable family. The closer you go, the more privilege you have. And it really changed that conversation where there's one layer we look at where we think about problems where, oh, there's an issue around gender, there's an issue around race, there's an issue around poverty, for example. That's one level deep. But as we go going into the second and third order effects of things, you start seeing there's a bigger picture, some of the challenges that can impact us from our energy to our education to everything.
Yeah, okay, so and designers in general, people are new to this whole field. This field is new to itself. People are figuring out what simple steps do some of the people in the audience or some of the people in the audience take in order to educate themselves about systemic design or systems thinking principles, because they're really dense to get there, like your head around, and the people talking about use a lot of metaphors and stories, and like it can get quite confusing and really off-putting for us normal designers. And then all right, so first of all, like what steps should people take? And then secondly, they're going into business context quite often where everything's measured quarterly. So to have a long-term systemic approach to like say like a sustainable business transformation, which is going to take a couple of years, right? You're going via ESG to sustainability, regenerative business models and stuff. How does that work? Like, what is the transition when they're patting you on the head saying, listen, all that woke stuff is great, but we got to get our quarterlies in. How does that conversation take place? And how do we educate ourselves to be able to have that conversation and kind of because you're from the business, both of you from business backgrounds, right? How can we utilize the language in order to be able to have those conversations with those people and make it make sense to them from their point of view?
Learning, well, the hub.
I was going to say,
I think the resources are really good and useful. And there's new books coming out all the time that are actually very much more accessible than the early Donatella Meadows, 1970s, which is still good, but
Oh, yeah.
there are a lot more resources. The Miro one I mentioned earlier is also good to have a look at because it steps you through. Yeah, it's a problem. You've got a bunch of businesses who are still very much based on profit, and they've got to think differently. In a way, the fact that everyone is having to start to share what the businesses are doing in terms of the environment is really good and works in our favour, because they then need to bring those numbers down and they'll need to change how they're working. So that helps, because at least the conversation's on the table. It's not somebody with an idea, not seen as being the environmentalist in the corner. It becomes good business sense.
So
those are achieved.
So when you say that, do you mean like ESG or corporate
Yeah,
social
so the
responsibility?
reporting is kind of what everyone's onto at the moment. So there's an awful lot of dashboards. Get asked to do dashboards, and that's okay. But I'm always interested in where's it going to go next. It's like, so we're measuring, we're counting, and then after that, what are we doing? Well, we're then looking at leverage points, and we're looking at what we can change, and that gives us potentially a what areas that we can dig into to try and adapt and change. And it may not be design that solves that. It might be a new innovation. It might be a technology, but I try to hold a sort of a viewpoint that's looking over the whole and then plugging away. And that's the other thing, is to being quite tenacious and not giving up on it.
So to have faith in the emerging fields and tools and processes and
Absolutely.
ways of thinking, and also the changes in legislation that are coming
Yes,
along with
they will
ESG.
help.
So it's on its way, it's coming, right? Just
It's happening now.
yeah.
It's happening now. In some companies, it's happening with a lot faster. There's a lot of small, medium enterprises that don't know what to do at the moment because it's such an overhead. But then what you're seeing is that the larger organisations that do have the resources are then saying to their suppliers, "This is what I need from you." So either those larger enterprises are doing training courses and so on for SMEs and providers into their businesses, or they're saying, "Unless you've done this, we're not working with you," which is what happens to us. But you can see it coming. So that piece is already rolling. So I have faith that will continue. Then what we need to do is, okay, so if somebody then comes to me or to us and says, right, we need help with this thing, how do I answer that? So that's what I've been looking at, and I think system thinking's got some of the answers to it.
And Daniel?
amazing. So agree, systems innovation, great area to go into. Look at the design council as well, great information there. I'd also say challenge your own perspective of things. So one thing I really focus on, especially during COVID, I try to open my perspective on getting different viewpoints. And that made me think in different layers. So I didn't just think about the issues around health. I spoke to economists, I spoke to people that think about futurists, I looked at technologists, I looked at people that were in the religious areas. I started connecting all these different voices together and trying to think about, okay, what are they trying to say, what are their perspectives, but how they're connected in some ways. And that really helps you think if you're not, if you don't want to just go through the academic route of this is a tool to do this in general. From the approach of working with businesses in general, I would say there's a give and take relationship, and that's where you have to deliver. So the short-term wins, the dashboards, all the things that businesses love to do, and pretty much what they want you to do, you can do that. But you can also portion some of your spare time, or some of your time, project time, or work time, to start thinking about the long-term picture. Try to find allies within your organizations that really understand the big picture. And sometimes there might be people you might be able to consider first. So it involves, as we discussed before, trying to get more voices across businesses to figure out who's thinking not just about the next quarter or the next year, who's thinking about next 5 to 20 years, and who's thinking as a systematic thinker in general, where they've got different perspectives and they're thinking about the zoomed in layer and the wider picture in general. So yeah, those are just some thoughts.
Thank you. I think we need to come to a close and open for questions. How are we feeling about that? Are we good?
We know.
Yeah. Okay.
What's that class do?
Right, so not everybody at once. Questions? Yes, blue t-shirt at the back.
Sorry, Helen, I really enjoyed what you said. We're starting to work on this stuff and we don't have the words and do you think system innovation or whatever we call it is the next frontier, like UX was X ago? Or do you think it's just another tool in our back?
I think it helps. If you think about UX, I think it's sort of the level above. You think about the system, then you go down. I don't think it negates any of the other things that we do, but I think because we need to think more holistically than just the delivery of the product or the service that we're going to do, then it is another tool in our toolbox, but it's the one that you need to have if you're part of the discovery phase, part of the strategy, you're driving long-term strategy or helping to support to do that, because everything else will then fit in around that. So I think it's a new tool we need to learn.
Yeah, definitely think it's a new tool. I would also say just quickly, I think we need to start evolving the role of applying systems innovation, systems design, whatever you call it. It should be everyone's role, whether you're designing or not. The role of design, the role of systems thinking, the role of innovation in general is always changing, and our roles are always you can be content designer, you can be a product designer, you can be a server designer. You need to think more strategically, and that involves how do you connect with the dots, how do you involve different people, how do you facilitate conversations, and how do you think about the wider picture, not just the short-term impact.
I think I have a take on that also.
Yeah,
From a UX design perspective, we're looking at certain interventions.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was an article in the on the Design Council blog recently, right? And it's like 4 layers of design. And if you're looking at artifact design, which is like graphic design, visual design, then you go into product and service design, but you're looking at UX design, kind of comes between those two. So those are the first one is like classic design. The second one is more design thinking based. The third one goes into business design and systems design. So some of it is design thinking based, but some of it is systems thinking. And then when you get into the 4th layer, you get into like systemic design, strategic design, really having like a wide overview of stuff. I think there's a problem here. Like everyone sees themselves in a very like siloed tract. So if I'm a UX designer, I'm only going to think about sustainability within a digital context. A UX designer, and I trained as one, so like a UX designer doesn't have any say in what really counts within the context of sustainability within digital, right? I'm not choosing where these massive databases are kept and how much energy is being used and all that kind of stuff. Then the meaningful stuff isn't really there. However, from a UX design perspective, I have a massive skill set that if I started applying systemic design principles to it and I started understanding sustainability, I could elevate what I do as a UX designer to a different role. Like it doesn't have to be within the context of UX design. I think there's if people have a wider imagination about this stuff, we're supposed to be innovators. That's the word that gets thrown around constantly. And I don't think there's enough innovation going on. So if we take systemic design and we apply it to what we're already doing, but we can take that to the next level and understand, hold on, the next level would be probably within business, probably with the strategic mindset and a strategic application using systems thinking or systemic design at the higher levels. And then if we're really zooming in and trying to get stuff done, design thinking is so much better for really executing than systems thinking is. Systems thinking tends to be a lot more thinking about stuff and waffling about stuff, which is necessary. but that design thinking is really about like getting it done quickly. So I think a combination of all of those paradigms. I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think it's a buzzword. It's been around a lot longer than design thinking has.
Yeah.
So it should get its dues and its respect. But I think the combination of all of those processes is happening now. It's really exciting that it's happening now. And I think there are other paradigms that people need to start adopting, like step out the UX. You're not a service designer anymore. Learn about
Yeah, I'll say something,
sustainability.
radical to round it up. It's about being a designer, going back to the question. When we talk about design, yes, we talk about the artifacts, the clothes that we wear, the chairs that we're sitting on, this environment, the nice graphics on these sheets of paper, but also thinking about, the service and the products, the governance, the strategy, the policy, and then ultimately the systems, and all of it is design. And when I talk to my students, I'm saying like, what the industry is calling for now, what the world is calling for, are new designers. And understanding that, systemic design is this kind of circumambient practice that helps, because the interventions happen inside this big kind of, I imagine it as a cone, and if you tip it over, it's a lovely landscape innovation. It's great, visuals, visuals, visuals. But, when we talk about UX, it's kind of the flavoring inside it that treats very specific interventions, but without the knowledge of the whole, that's when it becomes short-term and problematic. And this is why we need systems. Yes.
So thank you, and thank you all for your discussions. I have actually a question, because when we think of systems thinking, we could even go back to Greeks, but
Yes.
if we think more recently,
Yeah.
in the 70s and in the growth, there was already Forrester making all possible simulations of systems.
Yeah.
How come it arrived so late in the design practice that tends to be so interdisciplinary to a certain extent? And how is it received today? Like, how is it perceived? Because from what I see in the architectural practice, which is my background, there's a strong resistance to that. So I'm curious to know a bit about the discussion.
Should we go from industry first, and I can?
I don't need to do the academic.
I do the academic first.
Yeah.
But this is interesting, because this is the first time I'm seeing students coming through the door who are asking, who want to be designers of change. And when they describe to me what they want to do, I'd really want to do something about human rights. I'm really passionate about the environment. I want to do something that'll make a change in these areas. And that's the kind of narrative that's coming through the door. It's not, hey, I'm really into making interfaces, or I'm really into, I don't know, PCBs. I mean, that's great if you can do that, awesome. But increasingly so, students are coming through because of the complexity they see around them, and the digitalization of everything has kind of emphasized and accentuated it. We started to talk about the necessity to think more broadly. There is rigidity in design education. There really is, because for so long, as you know, particularly architecture, oh gosh, there's this certain way of teaching, which means you have to specialize. You come into university and you have to decide what flavor of design you're on. Are you graphics, products, interactive, architect? What are you? And then you're going to solve these problems, these really complex problems, within these sets of mediums and constraints that that particular discipline gives you. When in reality, and you know, and I know, and many people in here know, that's not quite how we work. We need to know all these different knowledges and all these different practices put together to make something that actually lasts a long time and has a positive impact. But we're seeing the change now. This is why even design education is now being forced to expand and think about this, the circumambient of the systemic. But I know from industry, with the people that I work with, and they tend to be kind of in similar areas as Daniel, particularly in social design, that we're realizing, we can't even define what a product design is anymore, because ultimately we're not talking about a product as we've known it. I know we had this conversation the other day, like, what you needed a product designer, but you didn't want a product designer.
Yeah.
What did you want?
Inside joke.
No, I was just saying we've had the problem that put a designer out on the website, and then you get somebody who's from Loughborough who can do a maquette, and that's great, but that's not what we were looking for. So then we've had to specify down more and say, well, we want a digital product designer, and we have to be far more specific. But then the more specific you get, the more you're closing off the job to other people who may be interesting, more biases start to come in, etc. So it's a whole minefield. We've been trying lots of different ways to deal with it, but we always get quite a lot of different random applicants as a result.
It goes down to the whole who is able to become a strategic thinker, a designer, a systems thinker in general. I'm quite lucky to do a lot of mentoring across AVP lists, so amazing design people, and I get requests all the time for my time because people want to become service designers, and they come from, let's say, background in law, in technologies, in let's say in general, and they all want to become more strategic service designers in general because they've heard about it, but they can start doing it in their existing jobs. I think there's too much of a focus on labels. I see the point in terms of if you want a product designer that has a certain set of skill sets, that's important, but I still think there's a way we need to start shifting our thinking where it don't have to be, and this is going back a couple of years, but when I started going into the industry 12 years ago, a lot of designers finding up were middle class, white, men generally, and if you just look around the room, there's a lot more diversity to people that are from different places.
There's a luxury role. There's a luxury thing to study.
So there was a privilege there. I think over time there's more acceptance because there's a bigger need for people to become more strategic design, more system thinkers in general.
In the end, I look for critical thinking, and I often look for square pegs to fit the round hole. If somebody's, I mean, the UX became a thing. I've been around a while now, so I remember pre-UX, and we were looking at how you might interact with technology. Then UX became a thing, and everybody's following a process. And when I used to teach, I used to say there was a process, but if you follow it, you come up with something, but it won't necessarily be particularly innovative, and it wouldn't have taken you off on a journey which you would go on if you're observing or listening or talking to people and you're thinking. And so the types of people that we hire, regardless of what titles, I'm looking for craft level skills, obviously, because they're going to be a designer, I need something on that front, but I'm also looking for the people who question, who challenge, who have a side hustle, I'll ask what their other interests are, and who are critical thinkers, and who are just the types of people who question. Because for me, regardless of whatever phase we're in terms of what we call a thing, that ultimately we are in an environment designing different things around us. And we've got a pressure on us right now as well if we put sustainability in the mix of what we're doing and responsibility. So we should get on with it.
I think I have a slightly different take on that. I'm very new to design. I've only been in the game a couple of years. But I've been very deep in other fields. So it's essentially this is what I've seen, right? There's an arrogance to designers in general. There's like, especially architects, but no offense. So there's a craft that they do that's been around for a long time, and they're great at that particular craft, and this is the way to do it, and no, you should do it this way and that way. So there's a lack of innovation going on in general. So therefore, like if you're a gatekeeper of something, of information, of how stuff is done, then you can be very snobby towards the other disciplines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think the prevalence of design thinking is due to tech. The smartest, richest people in the world needed design thinking for UX design. Therefore, they've invested billions into the process, and they've got it done really quickly. It's spread all over the place. They've messaged it well. Everyone wanted to learn this stuff very quickly. It was the information age. It spread out very quickly. Systems thinking has been around for 60, 70, 80 years. You could argue to 2,000 or 3,000 years or whatever, but it's been around a very long time. It's had time to split off into different schools of thought. They're all grey-haired old men who argue with each other in LinkedIn comments and stuff, right? And basically, yeah, it's super dense. It's really hard to get into. So if you're a designer who's from a design thinking background, which is A, B, C, do this, do a bit of testing, prototyping, blah, 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 iterate, empathy, all right? And you do all that stuff. That's an easy to understand process, right? That's an ABC. I love design thinking. It got me into design. But at the same time, if you start looking into systems thinking, because you're like, hold on, what is this about? really dense. They've done themselves no favors. So the arrogance of the designers and the arrogance of the systems thinkers, they tend to be the little trolls in their like, so like it's just a weird combination. It's a weird combination, right? And I speak to all of these people because I was really interested in all this stuff. So I think the convergence of all this stuff, there's people like Peter Jones and Crystal Vanell. They published a book called Complex Journeys Through, no, Complex
Journeys Through Complex.
There you go. Through complex titles. Yeah, so it's basically a step-by-step process with all the canvases that systems service designers will understand, and then they can start adopting those processes. It includes futuring methods. It includes systems thinking. It includes elements of design thinking. It's all very familiar to service designers. Highly recommend that. The Design Council dropped a book like a year or two ago. It's good for principles, not so much for the actual tools. I think they're dropping a set of tools in the next couple of weeks. And I'm really looking forward to deep dive in that. There are some other sets of tools. If you go into Symbiosis in design, they have like a set of coherent tools that people can understand. They're really accessible. It's out there. You just need to grab one of these books, really deep dive it, start practicing the different methods, and you'll get to it eventually. Yeah, so essentially, I think there's 2 or 3 components that have finally worn away, with the arrogance of this lot and the trollishness of those lot. And
It's pointing at me for some reason.
no. It's just, I was using all fingers.
Yes, questions.
As an original question I had, which is, I think each of you through the conversation had a understanding as novel. Should we expect well-established good practice and clear definitions about what systems design is, or should we expect it to be emergent, experimental, not lacking good practice? And if so, part of you would sort of push back against that final comment in terms of sort of as a general heuristic, I'd be highly skeptical that anyone who tries to describe complexity in very simple terms, because I think Helen, you touched on it to say we in this room, I don't think it's fair to say 8 billion people would say that this is a problem, but I think it's sort of the recognition of something that warrants attention. But being able to describe something is not the same as that being something.
Yeah.
And I think it's so. Anyways.
Thank you for that. That's excellent. Do you want to go on?
I've kind of forgotten the beginning of it. Because I thought something when I wanted to say. I think to me it's emergent because it's new to me. But it's not. It's a whole field that's been around for a long time and is a science. I think, I come at it from, can art meet science? What's in the middle? And I propose that there's an area there that could be emergent and really, really interesting. I'm not in a position to hire a proper systems designer, systems thinker into business at the moment, but I'd love to, because I want to experiment with that. And I want to see, by bringing in that different perspective, what that does to the design practice. So I guess to answer personally, I think it's emergent for me that I'm trying to get into this, and I'm seeing new tools that make it easier for me to do that. And thank you to everyone who's making this.
So it goes into, I think it also goes into the maturity of the organization or the area you're within in general. So I did some work in the Middle East last year. So my planning is all over the place. If people are pre-COVID, COVID, and post-COVID, that's what I see in these days. But just after COVID pandemic, we went into the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, to teach tools and skills that are very simple for me. And even 20 years ago, it'd still be very input, but it was brand new to them. And I think it's just because they understand what complexity is and how important it was for their bottom line or their business or their government in general is always something we have to consider. the closing point is there's always going to be a cycle of who really needs to think about system thinking over time. I'm going to close there. I'm also cautious. This lady, she put up her hand 3 times. I know. If you still have a question, please put your hand up. If not, sorry to pick on you.
Yeah, can I go?
Yeah, go for it, yes.
So this question is for all panelists, but it comes from one of Daniel's points on us sharing and learning from one another, but also from Manny's point around arrogance. How do we create a system that rewards collaboration and not competition? Because we all, I think, in this room see the value of collaboration very much, and learning and sharing and all that good stuff. But we're not often in systems that allow that very well. So how do we do that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Around reciprocity of the system.
I was going to say there's a fantastic book called Reciprocity Effect, Reciprocity Advantage. It is. Someone that used to have a list and it's dyslexic as well. It's the thing. I'm not actually out of control of reciprocity, but let me move past that. I think it's around mindset. So I very much started off in terms of open innovation. How do you get smart people outside the organization to work with you? So it's around rather than compete to create, we move into collaborate to create in general. And we need to create a more open space for people. And this goes back to the design savior complex, what Manny said before in terms of designers, some design attitudes.
Yeah.
I think the design community is quite open, where we invite other people's thinking, their shared stories, try to remove our biases. But how can we make environments in different industries and different relations more open, so we can get people's thinking across?
And it's kind of going back to this idea of new designers that will challenge the arrogance and the kind of very rigid practices that we've been establishing and educated for a very long time. That, you know, it doesn't just belong to the artifact level, it's everywhere, and the exchange needs to happen, because otherwise you're just going to replicate the same thing over and over again. That's just going to present the same results. But it's funny, Manny posted something ages ago on LinkedIn that really made me laugh, because it was so true and it hit right in the heart. But it was addressing, you know, like designers are strange creatures, because they love to really gatekeep, because they've been through the pain of designing something, implementing it and seeing it fail. Yeah, it totally is. And then when they see other people kind of go, oh, I like a bit of design and I like a bit of design thinking, they get all precious about it, because they've kind of reared in, it was their thing. And now they're going through this transition where they're realizing, actually, I need these people to tell me all these things and I need them to work with me. We're moving into this social design paradigm where it's not designing for people, but it's designing with and for people. And this is what comes down to this idea of reciprocating systems. You know, so it's a mindset challenge, but I think designers play a big role in it.
I think if I can jump, there's parts of the system and all of them are like in conflict with each other. Go around, have conversations with every individual department and see where they're incentivized, and then try and play the game. And then, okay, how do we subvert that process, the incentivization of that? Or how are we gonna utilize that to our benefit? And how are we going to play the game so it works as a whole? Are people earning on commission, or like, how does that work? And can we change that? And how are they going to feel about that being changed? And then, like, where is the wiggle room in this stuff? That's the real innovation and creativity, I think, is being able to understand that about humans and work that system out.
I think, oh no, I really want to take another question. Are we allowed one more? One more.
It's a related question. I think we just started to ask, which is when we're trying to bring this thinking to the organisation, I'm particularly thinking the private sector, who are just not on the radar. In your experience, are you better fighting that system, whatever structures they have, and then like, I'm going to have this, like you will hire that is changes, or are you better working within that system as it is shape? And saying, okay, well, that is the structure. I'm going to find ways that I can help it. I can not fight it, even if it is slightly giving it in a bit. I'm really curious if it's more the work with, trying to make a new system, or if it is very much just accept some of the feet to start with, and then work pragmatically.
I've gone for the second option at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that just to loop back with your question, culture takes a very long time to change.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's what we grow up with,
Yeah.
it's what we're used to in our cultural norms. And that's the same in business,
Yeah.
where it's been about profit forever and ever.
Yeah.
If you can start to look at how to change outcomes, then you can look at and get alignment on that. Then you can look at how you change the incentives to reach those outcomes.
Mm.
And if you change those incentives, then you'll start to change the behavior. And so I tried to sort of come at it round from a different angle, and see where I can poke and prod things to move things forward and action that change. And in doing so, working with people. But like, I think if my client is only incentivized by making the next quarter, and their jobs depend on it, and their livelihoods and everything they know, then that's what they need to do. And I understand that. So I'm trying to, the most successful organizations are the ones that thought about it slightly differently and given incentives in real monetary terms for behaving differently. And that's one of the ways in which it starts changing.
I think I have a couple of different answers for that. So within systems thinking, there's a concept called panicky. And it's like, are you on the ascent as a company, or are you on the descent? Are you on the decline? Companies that are on the decline are really easy. Like, you can usurp that process in the system within that. So it's kind of assessing where you are at the time. Just be practical, because it's not always going to be like a simple answer. Do you get involved at this stage or that stage? And the other concept is, if you know business and you can use the business language to the right people in the right departments, and you can quote back to them whatever they need to hear about ROIs and stuff, go into the ESG side of things. If we're talking about sustainability, for example, because it's like Helen said earlier on, ESG is really squeezing a lot of companies right now who didn't see it coming. Legislation is changing all over the place. Legislation is about to change all over the place. Their competition are like adopting ESG principles, and therefore they're becoming more sustainable. Therefore, they have a competitive edge over the long run. So there's loads of scary elements for businesses. You just need to like find the pain point and stick your finger on it, and really get and explain it in a language they understand. And then this whole thing about quarterly measurements makes it really hard to make long-term changes. So when we're talking about people, planet, profit, if we're talking about ESG principles or mission statements and all that kind of stuff, trying to get the companies to understand why this stuff is important from a long-term strategic perspective, where the incumbent dangers are for them, where they're about to get shafted if they don't do anything. These are the most conservative people on the planet, right? You have to explain to them why they're putting the company at more risk by not doing anything than they would be by doing something, right? So, okay, this change is going to happen, etc., but you are going to get disrupted with this stuff, right? So actually, it comes out the systems realm, it comes out the wishy-washy, like 5 blind men and an elephant realm, right? It comes out of all of that, and it gets down to cold hard brass tacks. And if you can see where the pain points would be for that individual, with human-centered designers, we've got humans in front of us, these people are humans, figure out what they need, what are their incentives, and then play the game. Just play the game, figure it all out, map it out, play the game, make the whole thing work. It's not easy, it will take a very long time, but that's basically how it's going to work, if it's going to work at all. And we kind of need to make it work, right? And it's our job to do that.
To add to that, I was just going to say, I think a lot of people, clients, businesses want to change. The individuals want to change, they don't know how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is why an exploration to some of the areas of system thinking can help visualize how they might be able to change. And
I
that's
agree.
why I'm interested in.
Daniel, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll be very, very, very quick to know what things to do. So I agree, first of all, you can't change something straight away. There's always going to be a level of resistance. I'd say if there's more than 3 people, there's always going to be a level of politics. It's just the nature of things in general. Understanding the environment you're going into first before you try and change it is always key. It's basics, the system changing generally. And as Charlotte said already, there's already people there that want to create change. But it's just finding them to have those conversations and almost empowering them to do the work, because they've already got the inherent relationships and they understand how the system, their organisation works already. That's it. Try to make sure.
And I think Joss is already sending me that
Yeah.
on the side.
Been waiting for a while.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you so much. That's it.
That's it. Done.
Let's celebrate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it sounds good.